Suppose that you don't care if people get some details wrong about some 2,300-year-old mathematics proof. Yet, here you are. Hence, by contradiction, it is proven that you do care if people get some details wrong about a 2,300-year-old mathematics proof. And rest assured, you're in good company. Circa 300 BC, Euclid of Alexandria penned The Elements, a textbook of such singular enduring prevalence that the man and his work merged into one, and it was common to study Euclid for one's mathematics education. The Elements was most famous for its treatment of geometry, but in fact, only the first 6 of its total 13 books concerned plane geometry. Books 7 through 10 cover number theory, and it's in book 9 of this sequence where we find a famous theorem and an equally famous proof by contradiction. At least, that's what everybody says. The twist is that even though innumerable reputable sources describe Euclid's proof of the infinitude of primes as a classic example of proof by contradiction, it's simply not true. Euclid's famous proof of the infinitude of primes is not by contradiction. Let's look at some examples of authors making this mistake, then look at a more faithful account of Euclid's proof, directly translated from the original ancient Greek, and discuss why it even matters, one way or the other. In case you're not familiar with what proof by contradiction is, let me show you a typical modern version of Euclid's proof, which uses this form of argument. We begin with a contradiction assumption, supposing the opposite of our claim. There are only finitely many primes. So we can list them P1 through Pn. We'll then demonstrate that a contradiction results, showing this assumption must be false, thus establishing the truth of our claim. So consider the number n, which is one more than the product of all the primes. Clearly, this number n is greater than each of the primes, and so if n is itself prime, then this was not a complete list, which is a contradiction. On the other hand, if n is not prime, well, it's certainly an integer that's greater than 1, so it must have a prime factor. Say we call that p star. This prime factor, p star, can't be any of the previously listed primes, pi, since the number n is one more than a multiple of each of those primes. This means that none of those primes can be a factor of n. So p star being a factor of n means that it must be a new prime that's not in the list. Again, a contradiction. To avoid these contradictions, it must be that there are infinitely many primes. This proof, or variations of it, are constantly misattributed to Euclid. Now we must do the difficult thing of casting stones at guilty parties. October 14th, 2017. 2 weeks before the release of Super Mario Odyssey, I was busy spreading misinformation. In this ancient 4-minute video, not only was I perpetuating what I call the postless n, but I described a proof by contradiction for the infinitude of primes. To my credit, I didn't cite Euclid as the source of the proof, but I'm almost positive if you asked, I would have told you we had Euclid to thank. I happen to remember where I first read the proof that there are infinitely many primes. It was here on page 144 of Arthur Benjamin's Magic of Math. He both describes it as Euclid's proof and, of course, gives it by contradiction. Whether or not the misconception I got from this was later reinforced by my own logic and proofs professor, I can't recall. But this is the book I used in my logic and proofs class, the famous Book of Proof by Richard Hammack. And on page 140 of the Proof by Contradiction section, we have an ancient example dating back at least as far as Euclid. It is again a contradiction proof of the infinitude of primes. This one's also a bit different from the others because it reaches a contradiction by equating an integer and a non-integer. Absolutely not not what Euclid did. And let me briefly remind you that these contradiction proofs are totally valid. The complaint of this video is not the validity of the proofs. Some time ago, I went to George Andrews' 80th birthday math conference at Penn State. See if you can spot me. Here is George Andrews' number theory book. Near the opening of chapter 8 on prime numbers, he gives Euclid's proof, which he describes as elegant. Yet again, it is the historically inaccurate and unnecessary contradiction proof. Quite a recent book I haven't read but I'm excited to get around to is Once Upon a Prime by Sarah Hart. And again, we find on page 17 the contradiction proof, which on page 16 was attributed to Euclid. Though at least in this case, Sarah Hart gives the proof in a unique verse form, something of which I am again also guilty.
Real quick proof that there are infinite primes.
Suppose, on the contrary, that there are not. Then there are finite primes, say P0 through Pn.
Mathematics in 10 Lessons by Jerry P. King, page 184. We find Euclid's elegant proof of the infinitude of primes. Again, contradiction. The Saga of Mathematics by Lewinter and Wodolsky, page 72. Euclid began his proof by assuming that there are only finitely many primes. Everybody says it, but it just ain't so. And it's particularly unfortunate the mistake is found in this book, since it is a book of math history. The whole point is to recount the past accurately. We're not doing historical fiction here. One of my favorite examples of recounting the past is my hour and 15-minute long documentary about the TI-108, a calculator for school children. Near the end of this documentary, several math science creators made an appearance, including Jay Cummings, the author of these wonderful real analysis and proofs books. And unfortunately, in proofs on page 300, he begins to describe the most famous proof in history, which again is a proof that never happened. Euclid's literally mythical contradiction proof of the infinitude of primes. And unlike Sarah Hart, who fittingly included a poem version of the proof in her book all about connecting mathematics and literature, Dr. Cummings includes a poem version of the proof in his 500-page textbook just because he can, and that's how he rolls. Hopefully now it's clear I'm not making this up. It's a preponderance of books and teachers that claim Euclid's 300 BC proof of the infinitude of primes was done by contradiction. To be fair, I don't want to give the impression that nobody recounts Euclid's proof accurately. Jay Cummings' third book I might describe as his magnum opus. It is some of the most fun you can possibly have for $32 US. And in it, he gives Euclid's proof quite faithfully. He then goes an extra mile to point out today the proof is often done by contradiction, which may help reconcile the confusion from readers who are familiar with it in that form. Aside from mistakenly calling it a proof by contradiction, some sources even suggest Euclid used factorials. Yeah, those ones. We actually saw this in the first book we looked at. And for another example, Derbyshire's excellent book on Bernard Riemann and his famous hypothesis attributes the result to Euclid, though not the proof, which he does here using the factorial. But the name and the proof are right next to each other. It's a tempting suggestion. Tobias Dantzig in Number, the Language of Science, which I don't have a physical copy of, explicitly attributes this factorial method to Euclid. And you can find many additional examples of all sorts of these mistakes in the article Prime Simplicity by Michael Hardy and Catherine Woodgold, which is my primary source for this video. Perhaps now it is overdue that we give a faithful account of Euclid's proof from Book 9 of Proposition 20, and then we'll get into why anybody should care. I don't speak ancient Greek, and you probably don't either, so to give the most accurate account we can of Euclid's proof, we must be careful to select a good translation. Hardy and Woodgold say, by some accounts, James Williamson's Elements is best, and so they use his translation. My reference was the 13 books of Euclid's Elements translated by Thomas Heath, but at least in this case, the two translations are nearly identical. And here we are, Book 9, Proposition 20, as Euclid puts it, prime numbers are more than any assigned multitude of prime numbers. And the true marks of Euclid's work are all over this proof. The omnipresent geometric perspectives representing numbers as line segments, the concept of one number measuring others, and the use of just three numbers to represent the general argument. Today, we would use an arbitrarily long but finite list. For the modern reader, certainly the most odd but important phrase in Euclid's proof is measured by. This means that one number is divisible by another, like 12 is measured by 3. Alright, into the proof. The slightly different proposition statement here just means that given any list of prime numbers, the list can't possibly be complete, hence there are infinitely many primes. And Euclid's proof begins not let there be finitely many primes, but rather let A, B, C be the assigned prime numbers. Think of this as just any finite list of primes. Euclid's proof worked with 3 numbers, but the argument works just the same for a list of any length. Euclid then lets DE be the least number measured by A, B, and C, which is seen here. And this means, in fact, that DE is the product of those prime numbers. So we may write this. He then adds the unit DF to this segment. You can see that on the end here. So just as in our modern proofs today, he considers the product of those primes plus 1. He then states this new number, EF, is either prime or it is not. The first simple case, if it is prime, then the original list A, B, and C was not complete. We found another, EF. On the other hand, if EF is not prime, well, it must be measured by some prime number. That is, it must have some prime factor. Let's say we call that factor G. Euclid then shows that this prime G is different from the aforementioned primes A, B, C. And he does this using a contradiction argument, which is maybe where everybody got confused. The argument here should be familiar to you. If G is one of these primes, A, B, or C, well then that would mean that G is a factor of DE. But G is also a factor of DE plus 1, so it would have to be a factor of their difference. Or as Euclid says, it would have to measure the remainder, the unit, or 1, df, which is certainly absurd. 1 does not have a prime factor. That means the prime G is not the same as any of those listed primes, so the list was not complete. Q, E, D. Again, Euclid's proof does have one point that is argued by contradiction, where he says, for, if possible, let it be so. But the proof as a whole is not by contradiction. He simply considers a collection of primes and shows that it can't be complete. The bigger question is, why should anybody care how this proof is presented, aside from historical accuracy? Surely a modern audience would understand the contradiction proof better than Euclid's awkward number line segment measuring proof, right? Sure, but it's straightforward to dress Euclid's proof in accessible modern language, which is seen in Oystein Orr's version from his book Number Theory and Its History. And a direct proof like this, more faithful to Euclid, has a number of advantages in this case. When inexperienced students read contradiction proofs, there's a lot of risk for misconceptions and hogwash moments. Direct proofs can be comparatively simple. The statements encountered throughout a direct proof fall into just one category: statements which have been proven to be true. The statements encountered throughout a contradiction proof can fall into 3 categories. And when I list these categories, I'm going to refer to the proof as the essay, just to avoid any confusion between saying prove, proven, and proof a bunch. Okay, there are true statements which have been proven to be true in the essay because they don't rely on the contradiction assumption. Then there are statements which are true but haven't been proven in the essay because the argument for them relies upon the contradiction assumption. Remember, a contradiction proof begins with that contradiction assumption, which is a false statement that is then used throughout the proof to justify other statements, some of which may very well be true, but we haven't really proven them if our justification is a false assumption. But of course, that contradiction assumption can also be used to justify false statements, and that is the third category. Statements which are false but are present in the essay because of the contradiction assumption. It's rare that a student would take the time to determine which type all of the statements in a proof are, and so what misconceptions they may come away with, only their future confused professors will be able to tell. Alright, we're done with that. One common misconception that results from the Euclid contradiction proof is that we can create a new prime by multiplying together the first n primes and adding 1. I specifically remember myself having this misconception at one point. Something along the way made me second guess this fact, at which point I recalled that in my memory it had only been proven using the assumption that this was a complete list of primes. So obviously it wasn't true. Thinking that it is true though, a student may realize the same logic would hold for the product of the first n primes minus 1, thus producing a twin prime pair, and hence settling the twin prime conjecture, one of math's most famous outstanding problems. There is perhaps no better argument that the contradiction form of this proof is inferior than to see that one needs only change, suppose there are only finitely many primes, to let P1, P2 through Pn be a finite list of primes. And the rest of the proof, depending on what version you look at, could be unchanged save the removal of a contradiction conclusion. Using contradiction, we can get quite a brief version of the proof that isn't as easy to change by just modifying the first statement. If we suppose this is the complete list of primes, then multiplying them together and adding 1 produces a number that's not divisible by any of them. But it's not possible for a composite number to have no proper prime factors, so that must be a new prime, which is a contradiction. And in fact, we could have pointed out a contradiction earlier in the proof, right here. But it's precisely this common formulation which I think most often leads to misconceptions. You can certainly see how a student might come away from this proof thinking that this is a surefire way to create new primes, which, of course, it isn't. On the other hand, even if this misconception is avoided, a student may think, of course this number we construct isn't necessarily prime, it's argued to be so in the proof only because of the contradiction assumption. Euclid's proof is non-constructive. But that's another misconception. Non-constructive is a bit of a dirty word, and some constructivist mathematicians would find Euclid's proof invalid if it was not constructive. But Euclid's actual proof is constructive. It shows how to construct a prime that's not already included in a given finite list. As Euclid demonstrates, all we need to do is multiply the numbers in the list together and add unity, and either that new number will be prime, or we can factor it to find another prime. Now, constructivists don't necessarily love contradiction arguments, so they might still take issue with this part of Euclid's proof which does use contradiction, but that part is quite easily reworded into another direct argument. Since the factor g measures EF, it is certainly different from the listed numbers A, B, or C. In the end, if teachers think that a contradiction proof is so much better than Euclid's original, then it would seem like a perfect homework exercise. But why not give a glimpse of history in math class and show the proof that Euclid actually wrote? A proof that is not, as a whole, by contradiction. And I suppose that's enough for today. Euclid is one of the most influential men in the history of mathematics, and I think it's important that when we tell our students of his contributions, we get it right. We don't mislead them, and we don't misconstrue Euclid's words, at least any more than is necessary to get them in a modern form of your language. One has to wonder why everybody started getting this proof wrong in the first place, but what's more important is when we start getting it right. And at least for me, that time is now.
Such a mess, and I should probably clean it